Mr. Matt Beaudreau, thank you so much for being on the Wolf and Iron podcast. Great to be talking to you again, man.
Man, honor and pleasure is absolutely mine, man. I appreciate you.
So you and I had a really good conversation probably a few months ago at this point, and I got a chance to talk to some of the young guys that you work with, and I was just so impressed by the questions that they brought to the table and just the maturity. You know, we all have this, especially from our generation. We have, I guess every generation does this. We kind of look at the younger generation and we talk about what's wrong with them, you know, and all the stuff they got to get right. And it wasn't like that when I was a kid. And now we make memes about it, which is kind of pathetic. But, you know, but when I was talking to these guys, I was so impressed by them. And I was like, I got to get Matt on here to talk about what he's doing differently than anything else I've seen. And so before I introduce you, I'll introduce a little bit of my background from an education standpoint for the audience's sake and for your sake as well. So we've got two boys that we raised. They're now 18 and 22 years old. So we got an early start on things. I'm 43. Yeah. So I'm not, you know, I feel like I'm not old enough to have kids that age.
Yeah.
But we homeschooled. And I think we tried out of those years of homeschooling, we did about 9 weeks of trying to do a public school. I think it was like a charter school.
Yeah.
I tell you what, when you take homeschool parents and you try to make them sit in a line with their car for 35, 45 minutes, no, that's a deal breaker immediately.
Nope.
So,
yep. Not going to happen.
Even with that, even with the control that we had in the homeschooling model, there's still a lot of things we have to teach to kind of be accountable to what the state wants and certain credit hours and various things. And so even with all of that flexibility, there was still a lot of my time was spent just really aggravated about how the kids, I felt like they had to learn or needed to learn and all that kind of stuff. And so our conversation today is, you know, we're going to be all over the place talking about this, but that's kind of my background, my history. And now I want to hear about all the things that you do.
Yeah.
You and I were talking before we got started about all the number of things that you do. So explain to the audience, all that you got going on.
Yeah, I'll give the kind of the high level because it'll just at least give context to because even just the things you're saying right there, I've got so many freaking thoughts on all of that right there. So, but to give context to that, you know, ultimately I've come out of the game of education, and I say the game very, very intentionally. I use it, you know, I call it that. But what I mean about coming out of the game is I worked at Stanford for a long time and including in admissions. And so I know kind of the higher ed, quote unquote, game. I was a public school teacher. I was a public school administrator. I was a private school teacher, a private school administrator. Ultimately left all of that to now build schools. So I own and have founded 3 K through 12s here in Northern California. And I use the word school because that's what people understand.
Yeah.
The schools that I build are not schools. They are workplaces for young people. We're building a vastly different thing than school as you and I, you know, grew up going to.
Yeah.
And that the listeners would even understand, you know, so we can talk about what that network looks like. I also help other entrepreneurs open those specific types of schools around the world. We've got a few hundred of us now that are being run by various entrepreneurs all over the world. I think we're in like 40 some odd countries. I know for a fact we're in like 41 states right now.
Wow.
And so continuing to build that out is a huge passion of mine. I do get to work with Fortune 500s around the world too on helping them understand those generational questions. Kind of you were talking about, you know, the generations we always tend to do this where we go, our generation has it figured out. Those old guys are living in the past. They suck. These young kids are ruining the world. There's definitely an aspect to that, but there are also some cultural things now that make it more true than it actually ever has been too.
Yeah.
So I help companies overcome kind of that generational gap, which helps informs what we do with the schools, you know? And so that those things play hand in hand. And then alongside that, you know, Tim Kennedy and I have started a mentorship program called Apogee Strong, where we focus specifically on the young men there, and bringing in, you know, it's kind of development of that agoge sort of deal, bringing in good men like yourself, you know, bringing in good men like, you know, we had Frank Grillo, the actor on last week. We had this morning, we had, yeah, he was great, man.
That'd be intimidating. That's awesome.
Dude, just a great dude. You know, have obviously Ryan Mickler, you know, as a buddy and has come on, and Ray Kerr and Jeff Hoffman. And, you know, we had John Fitch, you know, mixed martial artist on this morning. And we go from all different angles as far as life experience, but the commonality is that these are good men
Yeah.
who are good at being men, who work hard and have those traditional values.
Yeah.
And so we pour into our young men through that program. And then all of that has a bow tied around it with the Essential 11 podcast that, brings all of that in and is just geared towards getting really good people to pour into our young generation to build them up.
So, when I hear you talk, and I see the same thing in Tim Kennedy and the stuff that he does, and a couple of the other guys that we both follow, there are guys who are on mission, and then which is great. And then there are guys who are entrepreneurs on mission, and it looks a little bit different because entrepreneurs, a lot of times we've got our feet in just a lot of different things. And we can juggle not everything, but we can do a lot of things at once, especially when they all tie together, when they come together. Yeah. And I think that it's really interesting for the young men or just the kids in general to be able to see you living a life where it's not just, I do this one thing or I have this particular job, but it's like, oh, I've got 10 different things going on and they all kind of intermesh with my value system. And,
right.
Like that, if I was a kid seeing that, I'd be like, I'd be coming up with all kinds of ideas and stuff like that. So I think that even just that exposure itself, so much different than what they're going to get in a traditional education system.
Big time, man. And one of the, when you're talking about traditional ed, one of the questions we always ask kids is, what do you want to be, right? What do you want to be when you grow up? And then from a logical standpoint, we ask the kids, what do you want to be? And they've all got their hopes and dreams. And then we're like, oh, okay, cool. You wanted to be an astronaut. You want to be a doctor. You want to be a lawyer. You want to work in trades. You want to, sell cars. You want to do, all right, awesome, man. All those things are great. Now let's all do the exact same thing at the exact same time. Right. It doesn't make a lick of freaking sense.
You're all 18. You should have a job. You should be doing this and this. Yeah.
And so, it just from a logical standpoint, yeah, dude, it makes no sense. I like to ask the question of what problems do you want to solve?
Yeah.
And I think that speaks more to my, kind of DNA. And some of those guys mentioned that's like, well, I looked at that game of education and I go, okay, well, that's a problem that needs to be solved. And it needs to be solved now because I have children and they're going to go somewhere. So what do I want to do with that? Right. Yeah. So I'm going to solve that particular problem. But even within that, I'm going, but there's this cultural problem around masculinity, and foundationally that starts with our young men because I'm very much of the Frederick Douglass mindset, which by the way, Frederick Douglass, that beard oil.
Oh, the beard oil. Yeah.
Far and away, my dude, the best on the planet. Like so good, dude. So just so you know, just as
this podcast episode brought to you by.
Yeah, dude. I know you didn't pay me to say it, but dude, it is the truth, man. But I'm very much of the Frederick Douglass mindset of it's easier to build up strong men than it is to fix broken men, right? You build up these strong young men and you don't have to worry about all of these broken guys that we have. And so when you ask them, like, what problems do you want to solve? You can more quickly figure out who they are and build that up so they can go forward and want to solve problems. And that's my DNA through and through is what problem's going to solve.
Well, and we all know, everybody listening to this knows that there is a world of problems that didn't exist, at least not in the same level, if at all, that didn't exist for our generation. And so these kids are going to have to be problem solvers. They're going to have to grow up in a world where they go, okay, I've been in a world where I'm told what to do all the time, told what to think, what I should be paying attention to, how much attention span I should have, and all these kinds of things. So if you want to be different, when they get to be our age, they got to learn to be problem solvers now. They got to learn to think independently. So I think what you're doing is that 100% makes sense to me. And I think any parent listening to this goes, yeah, that's exactly what we need.
Right. Well, and think about that changing world I'm glad that you mentioned that changing world that you mentioned, right? There's, there's a concept of literacy just being around, the ability to read or not. And I think literacy is so much more profound than that. Being culturally literate moving forward will absolutely continue to mean you've got to be able to learn what is relevant now, right? Because right now, you and I, 10 years ago, dude, you and I wouldn't have been able to do it. We wouldn't have known each other.
Yeah.
Because you're in North Carolina, I'm in California. We wouldn't have crossed paths necessarily, more than likely, right? But we were able to connect on this device that I got here that's, through social media. Now we're connecting on this computer. 10 years from now, what are we connecting on? How is that going to look, right? We need to be able to learn whatever is relevant. That also means 10 years from now, this iPhone is a pager and it may no longer be relevant. So we also need to be able to unlearn, right? And so what we're ultimately talking about is that adaptability, and conventional schooling, traditional schooling is anything but adaptable, and it's anything but a system that creates an adaptable human. And that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So let's unpack this a little bit, kind of what your schools do. And I do think maybe school is a better word than like workhouses for children or whatever you said.
Yeah, sweatshops. No, I know. I get the connotation. It's hard to differentiate, for people.
Yeah, but it's an education, environment that's teaching them differently. Kind of unpack a little bit about how that looks different. I'm a kid, I go to a normal school. Everybody has an idea of what that looks like. Sure. What does it look like for the guys who show up and the gals who show up for what you guys do?
Yeah. So, people ask like, hey, give me the 30-second pitch on your schools. I'm like, if you got 30 seconds, then it's not going to work, man. I got to have more time than that.
You got more time. You're good.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot more that goes into it. Part of it is being developmentally appropriate, but which conventional schooling is not. We operate in what we call studios. So we've got mixed age groups kind of working together, but the entire campus will also get to know each other. So we, young people are going to come in, they're going to go to their specific studio. So if they're 5, they're going to be in a group that's kind of, 5, 6, 7, maybe that's kind of the age range. If they're 18, it's going to be the high school studio, right? 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. They're going to kind of all be together. You got kind of these mixed age groups. They all start their day with their morning meeting with that particular age group. And for all of them, it starts with you stand up, you turn, you look at the person next to you, you shake their hand, you say good morning, look at them in the eye, some of that traditional value stuff, right? Yeah. They all start with that. And then they'll go into a particular launch of the day. That launch could be a Socratic conversation. We're very big on Socratic discussion. We want our kids to understand how to think. Yeah. No desire on what to think. They know where any adult stands on any issue in this facility. They don't know because we won't tell them. Our job is just to push back on why do you think what you think? Why do you believe what you believe? What is your evidence? Can you genuinely listen to somebody else who has a different set of evidence? Can you change your mind if better evidence is presented? Can you both have an adult level conversation without getting overly emotional, and then come to the conclusion that, hey, we either agree or we don't. By the way, both of those are okay, and we can move forward and be friends, right? So civil discourse is a big deal. So we'll launch the day around some sort of Socratic discussion, might be even a TED talk or tackling a cultural, relevant event. Then they'll go into individual growth time. That individual growth time, again, depending on the age, it looks different. For the youngers, there's a whole lot more play involved, right? As they get older, you start to strip away and get to some more concrete stuff. That individual journey is driven by that hero and that hero's parents and their desires for that individual journey. So from an individual academic standpoint, we are helping them set their own goals for the day, for the week, for the month, for the year, depending on what they want to get accomplished. They may be doing traditional academic courses. They may be taking a course through Stanford online. They may be taking a course through BYU. They may be eschewing traditional courses altogether and just doing projects that are individual, but give them that same skill set.
Right.
So they've got that part. And then they also in the afternoons will have a collaborative project where every 5 or 6 weeks, they're going to have a challenge that a lot of times they're going to have to collaborate often with other individuals on campus that may be older or younger to create something. We might go, okay, you guys got 6 weeks. We're going to invite the community in and all the parents. And you're going to have to create an entire city. Some of it's going to need to be out of Legos. Some's going to need to be out of cardboard. Some's going to need to be 3D printed. Some's going to need to be wood, hammer, and nails. It's all going to need to be connected, and you need to have electricity run to it. So when everybody's here, we're going to flip the switch and see if electricity works. And they got 6 weeks to figure out how to work together and get it done. Yeah. Right? That's real learning. Because they have an outcome, and we're not telling them exactly what to do to get there. They're having to dive in and figure it out. And they're going to have collaborative projects that they're working on every 6 weeks in a different discipline. And then we pepper in responsibilities on campus. Olders are going to be teaching youngers. We've got an executive chef who is on site. He's 18. He cooks all of the meals, Weston A. Price approved. And he has 12 and 13-year-olds that work with him. So they're in the kitchen making real food, not frozen shit, real food every day.
Oh, man.
that they've got to get out, and they've got to get the orders out for however many orders have come through. It's real responsibility on campus.
Yeah.
They've got, cleaning duty. They've got, tours that parents come in, and they're going to have to lead some tours and go, here's what we do here. Here's how they learn to run the business too.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You made me think about something that happened. This is years ago. We went out of town to help a smaller church, basically help a school. There was a public school that needed some repairs, and some like gum needed to be scraped off of stuff, and like chairs needed to be painted, walls needed to be painted, all this other kind of stuff. And we showed up, as a church, kind of like, yeah, cool, we'll do this. And I just remember thinking, like, where are the freaking kids that go to this school?
Bingo.
Like, why aren't they here painting the desk that they spent the last year destroying?
Bingo.
It didn't make any sense to me at all.
That's right.
And this kind of stuff, as you kind of go through life a little bit, you start to notice these things, and you're like, the kids are just getting a pass on so many things, and they're not getting these wonderful opportunities to learn.
They're getting a pass, and we as a society have given them that pass too, right? We've decided you're a kid, you're not capable. Yeah. You're a teenager, which means you have to take some years off to act like a jackass, and you're not, we're not going to hold you to a high standard. And that's to our own demise as a society, right? Because we're not telling these guys, look, you are completely capable and can be personally responsible. We hosted a TED event here this past summer, right? We hosted TEDx Roseville. We hosted it here on campus. Big event. That's a big deal. We had big speakers. That's a big thing. Our middle school students ran the entire thing. Wow. They were running all the tech. They did set design. They ran the green room, and got the speakers all, mic'd up. We got Tanner Guzzi here speaking, and Michaela Peterson, and they're running the show, dude. Yeah. Fully capable. And that's our MO, right? Everything around what we do is you are personally responsible, and we give them the tangible tools to understand that they're capable of so much more.
So this responsibility thing is really key. And I think maybe it was your podcast that I was on, or talking to those kids. We maybe mentioned something about the development of the prefrontal cortex. Yeah. And how 50 years ago, right now, we'll say like most modern men their prefrontal cortex doesn't develop until they hit about 27 or so. Right. 25 to 27. But 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. It would have been earlier. It would have been like 23, 22. And even before then, it would have been even earlier. Mm-hmm. And there are people that we know today that we can actually look at, and their prefrontal cortex has developed, by age 18, if not before. Mm-hmm. And it's always the people who they've had to take on some responsibility that just seems, barbaric by our standards today. But like, there's a sister in the family, mom and dad dies. She's, she has to, or maybe they're sick or whatever. She has to start taking care of them and developing this responsibility. By the time she gets to be 18, 20 years old, her prefrontal cortex is fully developed. Yep. Same thing was true for our ancestors. And the same thing is going to be, you're giving these kids an advantage because they're getting this responsibility put on them. Mm-hmm. And, and they're developing that sense of like, I'm responsible for other people. That is adulthood. Like the recognition that I exist within a world, that I both play a part in how I affect other people play a part in how they affect me. Right. And there's got to be that balance, that dynamic there of my own freedom versus responsibility. That's adulthood. Yep. And these kids are getting a dose of that right now.
They are, man. That's literally it. So when people go, okay, well, what is the curriculum, for your schools? I say, dude, the curriculum is self-confidence that is earned because you've actually challenged yourself and you've taken on responsibility to do some hard things. So you've earned self-confidence. And it's self-awareness because you've tried a bunch of things, tried to solve a bunch of problems, and you figure out which ones you like to solve, which ones you're good at solving. You figure out a way to put both of those things together. It's all of that. All education is self-education. And it's that personal responsibility piece that people, you said it yourself, as you start to see these young guys on, an apogee, and you go, whoa, okay, you just don't see this normally. All it is these are hardworking, good-mannered, personally responsible young men who have put themselves in hard spots with projects and challenges. And you get a different human being out of that. That's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How do you guys give feedback or grading and stuff to the kids? Do you guys do that in a different kind of way than the traditional models?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, it depends on the individual side, right? If they are going through, if they're doing an academic course through a university, that's going to end up being a traditional kind of deal. If they're utilizing, Khan Academy for a specific math course, well, that's going to require a 90% mastery before it moves you on, right? So you get some of that traditional aspect. Otherwise, it's more what real world feedback can we give. So I use my oldest daughter as an example. So she's coming up on, she'll be 11 next week. She's not a huge fan of the traditional math courses. She doesn't like it. That's not really her thing. She's a big reader, writer, communicator, speaker. She loves that. Math, she could take it or leave it. So instead of doing a traditional course, she'll do these individual projects where, like last year, she had to build out a restaurant and start a faux restaurant business, right? But what she needed to do is she actually called local places, real places around here, as if she was going to be starting a restaurant. And she had to figure out, okay, well, how much would it be to lease this facility? What would I need to do in TIs going in there? And if I was going to build out a restaurant, what other materials? Where would I source those materials? How much would that really cost?
So this is an 11-year-old calling restaurant owners and asking me questions. That's awesome.
You bet. Asking these questions, right? And then having to put together a cash flow projection and having to run a mock P&L and go, how much money would I need to charge on these specific dishes, and like going in on that. And that's a challenging deal. And I'd rather walk alongside and have that learning. So what do I need to do on a grade on that? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. How do you
that's
give
an arbitrary thing. Did your wife give you a grade for what, how you were as a husband in 2021? Like we get these, it's real world metrics. We'll host our business fair. We'll have 1,500 people show up to this campus over 3 hours on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And our kids, 5 years old to 18 years old, some of them make $50, some of them make $1,000, some of them make $5,000 on a Saturday with their businesses. That's feedback.
Yeah.
Did I make some money? Did I lose money?
Yeah.
Did the person next to me have a similar, I sold cupcakes because I'm 5. The person next to me sold cookies because, he's 5. He made $80. I made 20. What happened? Was it his marketing? Was it? And we have those conversations. Yeah. That's feedback.
And that's as real world as it gets. I mean, like when we go talk to our accountant, and they try to explain, in the accountant verbiage, all the things that I'm supposed to know about where our money's going and how it works and all that kind of stuff. And I go, I don't understand that. They don't say, well, you failed. They just tell me, they explain it. They say, well, here's why this is important. Here's what this means.
That's right.
Like that's how the real world works.
That's right. And you don't have to know exactly how it works.
Yeah.
You've got to know how to communicate to the guy who does know how it works and know how to collaborate, know enough to make sure you're not getting screwed over and make sure you're making good decisions going forward, but you don't have to be an expert in that. Right. And if you wanted to be an expert in that, awesome. Then build your job around that and collaborate with other people who are good at other things. Again, that's how the real world actually works. But that's not what we do with our young people. And we wonder why we have a society of dysfunctional humans.
Yeah.
Silly.
So I'm wondering, just as you kind of described the scenario of the kids and all the different things they're involved in, I would think that the parents and that kids, I'm just thinking about I'm trying to think about how to say this, that they would be at a higher level of like responsibility and maturity and desire for their own kids. They would want to be those involved parents instead of the parents that are just kind of like send my kids to school and don't think about them. How do you guys find the interaction with the parents going compared to like what you would expect or what you hear about maybe or even from your days as a teacher?
Yeah, it's a really good question, man. And so you're right on the involved parenting, but even that I always find needs a definition, right? Because you've got uninvolved parents, that I've been in the ganglands of California and worked there, and you got some uninvolved parents, and that's obviously detrimental. I've also worked in some of the wealthiest communities in California, and you have over-involved parents whose entire mission is to be the overlord of their child's life, and that is equally as detrimental as uninvolved parents.
Yeah.
Right? So a big part of this understanding at our schools is that parents matter, but it matters first by leading by example. Like, are you on your own journey? Are you are you a good person who is also trying to solve problems and make things happen? You're leading by example first. And then you've got high expectations, but your expectations are around character and work ethic, not around them, your kids fulfilling some gap you wish you had filled as a kid, or reliving your glory days that you had as a youngster, or whatever that is, right? You have to make sure you're auditing your young human as who are they and how can we expand on that. So it's a harder thing to find than most people realize. So we actually have a pretty specific funnel. You go to our website and click on information about our campuses, and the first thing you get is a series of videos from me on why you probably shouldn't come here, why you probably don't belong. And it's watch all of these and understand all of these things. And then if you're still on board, cool. Then you can answer some questions. And if you answer those and you're still on board, then you get to come to an informational session where you're going to have 100 other families in there, where I'm going to try to tell all of you probably don't belong here either. And then if you're still excited, your kid can come do some shadow days where they get to spend time on campus to make sure they're excited. And then we're still going to have a family interview. And it's not because we're elitist, because that's far from the case. It's because we really want to make sure we've got people who are on board with what real education looks like, and they really want the best for their kids, even if that means, and it always means, their kids are going to struggle sometimes. And that's okay. They've got to be able to go, okay, this is a good kind of struggle. This is an okay struggle. And I want them to go through this struggle, right? So that's what we're looking for. Involved enough to have a voice and a presence, but also not going to be the overlord, and let them face hard things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's tough sometimes to not be, I don't know, not a helicopter parent, but there are a lot of excuses for kids today that didn't exist when I was growing up. Like, there are kids that have, autism, and there are kids that have sensory processing things, and there are kids that have all kinds of, things going on. And so the parents feel like, okay, this is something new. I got to jump in. I got to be a part of this. But at the same time, there's no teacher like reality.
Yes, sir.
And especially when you can experience reality with other people to help guide you along. And then having that second voice that comes from, not from your parents, but from, a mentor.
A mentor on another side. Yeah. That's right, man. That's exactly right. So, really what it boils down to, and it's almost, I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's a little sad in a way of how hard it is to find. I always tell the parents, look, if you've got young people that you are raising to just want to work hard and treat other people well, they'll be fine. Yeah. They'll be fine. In general, in life, if they're going to have those two things, they're going to treat other people well and work hard, things are going to tend to work out for them. And that absolutely is the case here, on campus as well. And it's interesting how hard it can be to find families that really embody that, all around. But that's who we're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. As an adult, for those who are listening, think about how many people meet that description. They work hard and they treat other people well. How many people have you met in your adult life that you'd say they fall in that category? Right. It becomes, sometimes it's few people, that really live by just that simple model. And, but the people who do, they're the people you want around. Those are the people you want working in your business, working alongside you, and they're going to do well.
Yes, sir.
So I know that you said that the kids don't really get it. They don't really know where you guys stand on a lot of things, like, political things and probably spiritual things and things like that. Right. But I know you well enough to know that, you would be against like wokeism and, a lot of that stuff. Yep. So how do you guide the kids into, what is best? Because I know they're getting a lot of influence still from, the outside world, just like we all do. Right. So how do you make sure that they're actually on a path where they're choosing wise things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So part of it is that initial screening too, right? With the families, and we want to kind of make sure there's solidarity there. Okay. Just from a character standpoint, we want to make sure that the characters are, not that we're going to agree, because by the way, there's almost no other human on the planet that will agree with you on 100% of things 100% of the time. And that's just right. So you got to figure out how to get around that. So it starts there, again, looking for quality of character. But what happens is, we've got a lot of systems in place, and that's really our bread and butter. Our systems are designed for a number of things. One of the systems is to make the adults irrelevant as soon as humanly possible. What I mean by that is we want it to run like a Fortune 500 company and have adults there, but have us on the sideline because the kids are running it so well.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're putting systems in place around that. We have a very specific system we put in place, complete with rules of engagement on how to have a good conversation. So we have rules of engagement on what a good conversation looks like and the components of that. And every conversation doesn't start with what the topic is. It starts with what are the rules of engagement? How are we going to behave as human beings? We're going to try to take emotion out of it and try to detach as much as possible. We're going to try to be factual. We're going to try to be punctual. We're going to try to provide evidence. If we're not sure if something is evidentially backed, we're going to have somebody who does a fact check and is able to validate that. We've got all of these systems in place for a good conversation. Once you have those, any topic is fair game. And then what you find is the old adage of the truth doesn't need to be defended. It defends itself.
Yeah, that's good.
Because it's defended by logic and reason.
Yep.
So it's no longer an emotional thing of what's the most, George Floyd just got killed, so America's racist. And if you scream it loud and you're louder and, you got more people screaming it than others, well, then you win the conversation. Cool. We're actually going to take it and not allow for the overly crazily emotional. Let's take a look at what's actually being said. You're saying America is racist? Cool. Then let's prove it.
Yeah.
Let's prove it. Logically, factually, systematically prove that the entire country is racist. Does racism exist? Of course. Does it exist at a systemic level? Well, let's unpack that a little bit. The truth defends itself. What happens is, and the truth always defends itself. What happens in a society is we just shitty at having the conversation around it. We don't understand what civil discourse is.
I mean,
that's how we avoid it.
The vast majority, everybody knows this from social media. The vast majority of adults that we interact with don't know how to have a conversation,
100%.
And this is why, most of the conversations, if you want to even call them conversations, the comments, they go sideways so quickly online because people don't know how to just engage, ask a question. Tell me a little bit, tell me why you think that. That's a great question. Tell me why do you feel that way? What makes that make sense? Anything, any kind of questions, they've never been taught that. And so I think that's like a game changer.
And if somebody questions your belief on something, not in a bad way, just goes, you know what, I tend to disagree. I'd like to see your evidence on this because here's what I think about it. All of a sudden we've been taught, well, that makes them your enemy.
Yeah.
And right. And that's an issue that, and again, academia plays a role in that. I did a movie a few years ago with Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla called No Safe Spaces. And it's on Amazon Prime right now. And we talked about how that was bleeding into higher ed on purpose. Yeah. And how we were kind of creating these safe spaces there so that nobody had to have their ideas challenged anymore because that hurt feelings, and that's a big friggin' issue. So we want to take that, that emotion out of it. We held a No Safe Spaces event a few years ago on campus, and had Dave Rubin, if you're familiar with him, Dave.
Yeah, from Rubin Report.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So Dave came out and hung out with us and did a great job speaking around, the need for civil discourse. And then we had some of our high school kids that had public debates around some heavy topics around, mandatory vaccination and abortion and gun control. And they had very different stances on it. But they presented their evidence. They did so civilly. They walked out friends. The entire thing is to show it is possible if we would make that our focus.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So I want to kind of wrap up here a little bit talking about the apogee, strong stuff that you guys have going on. So I'm shifting a little bit. This is my transition skills as an interviewer.
Well done.
Yeah. So tell us how did that get started? I know that somehow that has something to do with Tim Kennedy as well. Yep. So just give us an idea, like kind of, what does that look like? If where does that exist? How do people get involved in it? Just kind of whole overview and anything else you want to say about it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. So, building these schools out and seeing, and even with what we're doing here, having such an impact, there was obviously, still going to be a lot of people staying in, public ed and still being exposed to all these things. And culturally always been a fan of guys like you and Mickler and Guzzy and Donovan and all these guys that have been calling these things out. And, over the years of like, we need good, strong men. And so, I kind of got this idea of going, well, why don't we have our good, strong, vocal male leaders pouring into our young men like we used to, and we can do it at scale now.
Yeah.
So there's no reason that we don't have that. And so, I kind of put together kind of the idea and the concept, and I reached out to Tim and just went, look, man, you got a far bigger reach than I do. And I know you and I share the same ideals on this. And so what if we kind of did this and put this program together? And so he was on board with that, which coincidentally got him on board with the school. So I helped him open one of our schools there, as well, where he lives in Cedar Park, Texas. And so, we put together this year-long program that has, a new project every month, a new challenge every month. It's got a new book to read every month. It's got, weekly mentorship calls where you get on and have live calls with, guys like you and all these good, good human beings that are good men pouring into these young guys. And so we've been going for just at about a year now, which has been fantastic. So we've got young men from all over the world because that whole thing is virtual. And so we're going to continue to move that. The next iteration of that for us is going to be Apogee University, which is, we're going to launch that in the fall. And that's going to be more of a high level 6 months of one-on-one coaching around all kinds of skills that a good man just needs to have, followed up with 6 months of an apprenticeship that you'll have to interview for with organizations that we know share our values.
Yeah.
Right. So you have an interview with Echelon Front and go do an on-site 6-month apprenticeship with them, pouring in, providing value. And it's a paid position that costs more than that makes you more than the cost of the program. And then over the course of a year, hopefully you roll into a full-time position with those. So it helps these organizations go, okay, we know we have a good, young, hardworking young man who shares our values and ideals. We don't have to guess on that. And it helps these young guys avoid the college trap, avoid that, and go into real work that matters.
Yeah.
So that's the next iteration.
Dude, that's awesome. That's awesome. I know every guy who has parents or has kids that are listening to this is going, I wish my kids were part of this. I wish there was a way to, kind of get connected with all these things. And so, I'm fired up about it. Even my kids are older and I'm like, yes, this is awesome. If this existed in the Charlotte area, that'd be awesome. Yep. I'll share a little bit of a story here because I was thinking about how fortunate these guys are, these young men are, to be mentored by and to connect with guys like you've brought on the podcast. Mm-hmm. When I was, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, but I was in Amway for like a short period of time when I was, like in my 20 to 22, something like that, 18 to 22 years old, something like that.
Yep.
And we listened to this is back in books on tape and there was tapes. So we'd listen to tapes, inspirational tapes. This is before podcast. And, but I remember going to a conference one time and there was a guy there that I'd listened to his tapes and it was kind of cool to hear from him. But when I saw him like in real life, or on the stage. Yeah. And it hit me that I grew up in the country, pretty poor or, poor middle class, kind of bounced between those, had a single mom. And I saw somebody who had made millions just kind of like basically from nothing, from whatever to grow up to be that. And, whether you believe in, but just seeing somebody, actually seeing somebody who had made something from gone from one level to this other level just blew my mind. It totally changed the way that I thought about myself. Yes. And the same thing is true. There's tons of stories like that, by the way. If you guys ever look at any autobiographies from people who are big now and big and famous, there's a lot of times there is a moment when they met somebody or were mentored by somebody, in their earlier age. And the same thing is going to be true for these guys. You're going to have, you're going to have so many stories of guys that are in when they hit their 40s and 50s and they're talking back, oh, well, I mentored under Jocko or I mentored under these guys or I saw them or just met them and it just totally changed my life.
Bingo. That's it, man. So you think about what you get used to and what is your normal, right? What is the day in, day out? What do you see? And the kid that grows up in Compton and is, watching his parents deal drugs and get like that becomes his normal. And somebody grows up in a village, in a remote village, and they're having to go, cart water every day. That's their normal. Somebody grows up on friggin' yachts and whatever. That's their normal, right? For these guys, that's what we're building in, is like, this becomes your normal, the mindset of a Jocko, the mindset of a Andy Frisella, the mindset of Brian Callen, and the mindset of all these guys coming on and pouring in, that becomes their normal. And then they look to those guys as like, okay, those are the guys that mentored me. That's what normal looks like. That's what's possible. That's what, and it just shifts that frame for them to operate on a different level. You don't get that in school.
Yeah, no, you don't. You don't. You get it in workhouses for children. That's how I want to refer to it. I don't know.
I've never, I always describe it that way, but I love, you're definitely making me.
No, I was trying to think, you may not have even said it like that this whole time. I was trying to come up with a clever way of like, what do we call this thing? Like, how would I describe that to somebody?
Yeah,
it's just funny.
Center for Education.
Center for Education.
But sweatshop sounding more and more. Yeah, to the point. That's so funny. That's awesome.
So look, man, I appreciate you being on here. This has been a great conversation. And I want you guys who are listening to go check out the Essentials 11 podcast. That's a great place to start, because you're going to hear from, what these kids are getting a chance to experience. And what are some other ways that guys can just get in touch with you or find out more about what you got going on?
That's awesome, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, Essential 11's a big one. And then apogeestrong.com is our mentorship program. And if you want to find out about the schools, it's actonacademy.org. You can be able to find out about the schools. Acton is like action without the I. And then, I'm pretty active on IG, probably more than anywhere else, just at my name there. But glad to connect, around any and all topics like that. Any way I can help, man, I'm glad to do so.
Awesome. All right, guys, go check it out. And Matt, I appreciate you being here, man.
Back at you, brother, man. Thank you for everything.